the world runs on relationships, not transactions. Okay. So having the ability to establish and sustain relationships is really a critical skill. And frankly, what a lot of people don't realize is the first relationship they need to understand is themselves. You can't lead if you're not solid in who you are.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast, helping leaders live with integrity.
So today we're going to just talk about the importance of being a leader who lives with integrity in the workplace.
We've got a special guest with us today, Joe Brouillette, who joined the Living Wholehearted Executive Coaching and Organizational Development team. And he's got 4 decades of serving in executive roles in corporate America at companies like Accenture, American Airlines, and Verizon. As a seasoned leader, I love the way that Joe described himself to me early in our relationship. He says, I may be playing the back nine, but I'm still hitting the championship tees. And Joe, it is so good to have you with us on the podcast today. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and it's always a pleasure to spend time with you and Tara.
Love it. Well, we always, I shouldn't say always, but we like to get to know our guests and their personal story. The three of us know that people's stories impact their leadership and influence a lot of why they do what they do today. So give us a little bit of those key rocks in your story along the way that shape a bit of who you are today, Joe, and the kind of leader you are.
Sure. Delighted to. I'll take you back to sort of the beginning. I grew up in Southern California in a upper middle class home, raised in a Christian home, a Catholic home, and went to Catholic school, as a matter of fact, for a number of years. Went off to college, got degrees in finance and economics, and actually a minor in psychology, and began a career in business. However, probably one of the first boulders or rocks or rocky roads I had to really navigate myself was going to college and staying in college. Timing-wise, I was going to school right at the height of the Vietnam War. And for those that may have been around in those days, remember that it was pretty hard to stay in school. The U.S. Army was after you, and all the different services wanted to bring you in, and it was very difficult. So I started really learning how to communicate and learning how to sell, frankly, because I had to go to the draft board every semester and convince them to give me a 2S deferment so I could stay in school. Well, the good news is I was able to do that. And after I navigated those interesting waters, I went to work for AT&T, frankly, in one of their general management development programs. And began, moving up the chain and learning how to run a business. I had a very interesting career, been with a lot of different organizations, had a lot of different leadership roles. But as long as the subject is about rocky roads, let me share a couple of them with you. I raised a family, a beautiful family, a wonderful wife and 3 kids. But when my boys got, 2 boys, Josh and Logan, when they got to teenage years, they made some really poor choices around drugs. So that put our family through sort of a kind of a legal and criminal hell for about 15 years. And it was not at all very fun. Needless to say, it was at the height of my career, so I had some real compromising times relative to my ability to focus on my career. However, the good Lord sustained me, and I was able to do that. But unfortunately, both of the boys made some very poor choices, and took their lives of both of them 10 years apart. So if you really want to talk about a boulder or maybe even a cliff, death of a child in any family is certainly one of those boulders. But as I said earlier, I think my Christian upbringing and then ultimately my choice to align myself behind a relationship with Jesus Christ directly, really kept me sane and kept me going through all those difficulties. So just a quick snapshot. I spent really a better part of almost 50 years in leadership roles with major organizations in technology primarily, as well as in consulting, as well as working in mergers and acquisitions and doing a lot of things associated with helping pull companies together and launch companies. So that's pretty much I would say that probably the common denominator of most of my career is leading people through change and leading through people through growing their businesses.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe, for being so vulnerable and sharing
bet.
some of the hardest
Yes.
parts of your story in the midst of some of the heights of leadership. And it just points to the fact that leaders are human and have their own stories. And in the workspaces, we often forget that as we're all on mission for whatever the organizational goals are, and realizing that people have their stories and they're playing a role in how we're leading and why we're leading the way we're going.
Yes.
So thank you, Joe, for
welcome.
being vulnerable there and sharing that part of your story.
Of course.
Absolutely. Joe, at Living Wholehearted, we say that when leaders live and lead with integrity, everyone in their wake benefits. But when leaders don't, everyone in their wake pays. It's just a matter of time. Would you share with us how you've seen sort of both sides of that lived out through your decades of leadership and working with leaders behind the scenes in coaching capacities and right with them in the companies that you served in leadership seats? How has those both sides of that coin been personal, or you've seen it up close and personal?
That's a great question, Jeff, and the answer is fairly straightforward. If you spend any time in business at any level, whether it's a small business or whether it's at a corporate scale globally like I did, you see the dichotomy of character all over the place. In fact, one of the greatest challenges as a leader is to try to manage people's tendencies to want to operate out of integrity. So I've seen it, probably saw it mostly, other than just corporate politics, I saw it mostly when I was in the consulting business, because we were invited in to not only help develop solutions, but frankly, to fix problems. And so when you start untangling and re-engineering a problem, what you typically find is there's a human factor to why that problem exists. And often those human factors relate to people's desire to take care of themselves rather than their companies or their willingness. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on illegal activity, but what I'm saying is there's a whole lot of people that put themselves in front of other people. And you see that as you start untangling these complex circumstances inside of organizations. So that's how I saw it. I saw a lot of people that were very prideful, a lot of people that were more interested in their development and their behavior. And frankly, that's the contrast to that is overwhelming to me, because I've always created behaviors in myself that would lend toward the servant leader side of the scale. I was more interested in serving others than I was in just serving myself, because I learned very early on, if you take care of others, you'll take care of yourself in the process. So I saw just a lot of greed. I used to think for a while there that the only thing that motivated people was either fear or greed. To some extent, that's true. But so you see it. In corporate America, you see it. It can get pretty ugly.
Well, Joe, you raised a really interesting point to me using the phrase servant leadership. And I'm just curious, this is a little off script here, but I'm thinking about the examples that you may have had during your journey of who showed you what servant leadership looked like, what it felt like. Can you speak to that? Were there people that you looked to that formed and helped shape that commitment that you've made in your own leadership journey?
Sure. I think it's really quite simple. Let me start with defining my version of servant leadership so we have some context. Servant leadership is simply focusing on delivering value to others rather than just yourself. It's a very unselfish and very generous way to be. It requires a lot of humility and courage, but nonetheless, it delivers the best value to all considered. I've been blessed and fortunate in that I've worked for some large organizations that were very stable. And during that time in my career, I was able to see both types of leaders, servant leaders and more just corporate focused leaders that were really more interested in themselves. Now, that may sound a little unfair. It's not meant to be, because all a corporation is always about performance and results. So when you're focusing on performance and results, people get really focused on making sure they're okay. But the reality is, if you really want to build an organization and deliver value that is sustainable, you need to be looking at what you can do for everyone, not just yourself.
Hmm.
So if you want a long-term values and long-term sustainability, so that is kind of the context. Now, I had a great deal of servant leadership expressed during my years at AT&T, which was a high-quality organization. I also had a great deal of servant leadership displayed while I was involved with American Airlines. As a matter of fact, a lot of that came from the gentleman I reported to, who was at the time was the chairman and CEO of AMR Corporation. He and I used to travel quite regularly on a global basis together, and we had a lot of very interesting conversations on those long airplane rides. And he gave me a lot of advice on, for instance, one day we were traveling back from Tokyo, and we had just been at a ribbon cutting at an event that we did with the Japanese railroad, and we designed the systems for them for seat assignments and so forth. Nonetheless, he said, "Joe, how many people do you have in your organization today?" And I said, "Well, I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000. And he said, "Okay." He said, "I want you to remember something. When you make decisions, multiply that number by 4.5 or 5, because you're really making decisions for 1 million people, because those people all have families."
Mm.
And I thought, what a character statement of an individual who cared enough to coach me to make sure I was considering the whole size of the universe, not just a group of people that worked for me or a group of people that reported into my organization. That was just one of any number of examples I had. I also had a great leadership team with me when I was with Accenture. I managed the technology business development on the technology segment on a global basis. And we had some really great leadership at Accenture. They were a meritocracy, so they were very focused on making sure that the people had an opportunity to demonstrate their value. And frankly, as most people know, Accenture was not the low-cost spread. It was the high-dollar company. So whatever we did, we had to demonstrate value in significant ways. If you're going to be successful in the consulting business, you're going to do it by, frankly, honoring your client, loving the people, and doing the best for them as you can. What you get paid is almost secondary to delivering value and to demonstrating as you model through their organization how to behave, because a lot of what they're asking you to do is to do things they can't do. So you become the profile, you become the individual who demonstrates how to do things. So that was another one of those situations that gave me a great deal of opportunity. Then again, I was with Verizon, another telecommunications company. I was driving all their strategic decisions on a global basis. Met with a whole lot of great people all over the world. And because they're in the service business, they're naturally servant leaders. So I was able to deal with a whole lot of great attitudes and servant leaders. So generally speaking, I've been pretty blessed.
Mm.
Now, there were plenty of other people. There were plenty of people that had other attitudes that I had to navigate around and manage, not to mention the fact that I had an awful lot of problems I had to clean up because of those issues. So I can't say I ever had to clean up a problem with someone who was a servant leader. I was more involved with honoring them and congratulating them for their great work than trying to create some sort of a, disaster recovery program, if you will. So anyway, it's probably more than you wanted to know, but that's kind of a couple of quick snapshots for you there, Jeff.
Great snapshots. And
Yeah.
I want to kind of tease it out a little bit more. I hear the overarching servant leader is really thinking about the people, not always about the goal at hand and rising all the boats,
Yes.
and not just their own. But you mentioned pride, and early on you mentioned seeing a lot of pride. And though the three of us are people of faith and we follow Christ, that's like the number one thing for us as Christians. And yet, it's still a lot of pride, even of followers of Jesus. So I go, how does any leader, follower of Jesus or not a follower of Jesus, that has no faith, how do you remain, how do you keep that pride under under wraps and not making it lead, because leadership is a lot of people applauding you and looking to you, and you're the one with the answers, and you're the one that's going to solve the problems.
Sure.
And so it kind of feeds the beast. So Joe, how did you keep that under wraps in your own life?
Well, I'm with you. In your opening statement, there was so much. I glorify God. I don't glorify myself. So that starts there. But there are a lot of people in the world that are focused on glorifying themselves. And part of that might be that they don't have a relationship with God or with Jesus. But putting that aside for a minute, to answer your direct question, the way you do it is you operate as best you can in reality and the truth. You're not afraid to demonstrate your integrity. You're not afraid to call things what they are, and then take whatever you need to take in order to do that. I candidly had 3,000 very highly educated, extremely competent people when I was at Accenture reporting to me. And to say they were prima donnas is not fair. But nonetheless, when you get people that are unbelievably competent, high degrees, PhDs, multiple languages, they can get a little bit judgmental and they can get a little bit tough to deal with. Arrogance, narcissism, and some of these words that we use today was not an uncommon thing. And what I've found worked for me is I didn't try to compete with them. I just tried to be honest with them and be vulnerable and build some trust, which led to demonstrating integrity that they got to see. I treated them the way I wanted to be treated, and they caught on. And it didn't take very long, but they could see that we are operating a highly integrous organization, and we all needed to have some humility. You know, humility and courage are two sides of the same coin, and you have to explain to people that the real power in life comes from humility. The real courage comes from knowing who you really are. And when you don't operate in pride, where you're trying to prove something, but you operate based on the skills that God gave you, you become a very powerful person. So a lot of these people had to really realize that they were misapplying their capabilities. And when they finally realized that they were much better leaders, when they were humble and when they were vulnerable and when they built trust with their teams, it didn't take them long to figure out that that was really good advice.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, understanding that in your years sitting in executive leaders chair in global companies, you've seen it all. I mean, what do leaders sitting in that chair for only a short time really need to know the most? You know, in other words, what are they missing that is critical to being a more healthy, what we call it, living wholehearted, or wholehearted leader?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of answers to that question, but I think it boils down to a couple things. One, it boils down to understanding that the world runs on relationships, not transactions. Okay. So having the ability to establish and sustain relationships is really a critical skill. And frankly, what a lot of people don't realize is the first relationship they need to understand is themselves. You can't lead if you're not solid in who you are. So learning to, frankly, the greatest challenge in leadership is leading yourself. Okay.
Fair enough.
I recently wrote an article called Leadership Matters, and it does, because everybody's a leader. You might be leading in your community, in your job, in your family, but you're also leading yourself. So if you don't have a healthy and a high degree of character and integrity, honesty, truth, vulnerability, all the things that we use to define character, you're going to stumble and you're not going to have good answers. So I would say, I would tell any young leader to be patient, to take their time to understand what they're doing and what they're asked to do. And the other thing that is incredibly important is to be able to cast a vision, to be able to give people that you lead an idea of what the journey is going to look like. And frankly, even more importantly, what the destination is going to look like. And then take your time to make sure that they're always apprised at how you're doing in the journey. Tell the truth, give them realistic information, and just keep them focused with the truth. Yeah.
I love it. It's a principle across the board. It's
Yes.
living in reality. Reality can be scary for us
Yes,
because
it
of our
is.
egos and because of
Yes.
our stories. And so we're trying to unpack for that younger leader. I'm curious, what would you tell the seasoned leader who's been in the executive chair for 40 years and they, still feel like they've got a lot to give? What advice would you like to give them?
I would tell them that don't undermine or don't underestimate's probably a better word, underestimate your value. If you've been in the seat that long, you've got some experience, you've got some knowledge, and certainly have some skills that need to be communicated. The fundamentals never change. Now, the context in which we look at fundamentals can often change. I did a whole lot of things on paper that I now do digitally, just as an example.
Good example.
But frankly, the fundamentals of being honest and straightforward and telling the truth and being a loving, caring person, that never changes. You just may do it differently and it may look differently. But I would tell that senior leader that frankly, they've got a well full of knowledge and capability that the younger people really need to understand. I talk to a lot of young leaders. One of the things I do is invest in technology startups. And I sit on some boards of some very, very young entrepreneurs. And every one of them are brilliant in their world, but they don't understand a lot about the world in general. So I spend a lot of time just coaching from my experiences, and people understand it.
Mm.
We love that about you, Joe,
Yeah.
and you model it for us, and it's wonderful to see and to see impact. And for all the years of service that you've been a servant leader and working this out, you've been excited and committed to the principles of integrity and passion in the workplace. Those are two things that you came into in our first calls together. I heard about this through a mutual friend that introduced us. This passion that you have for integrity and for passion in life and in the workplace. So behind the scenes, though, we know this as well. You've shared at that Origins piece of where we met, the excitement and commitment to these principles that come from your Christian faith, which is so awesome. And in fact, it was the very thing that led you to us in that space, an interest in this season of your journey in life. How could I and might I be able to integrate that more into actually the work I do in leadership and Living Wholehearted? We had the opportunity to have been doing that for a while, and it's been exciting to discover how to flesh that out. But would you talk a little bit about what you've experienced, what you've seen, and maybe even you're helping to lead here within Living Wholehearted now? So I think of our cohorts, executive coaching.
Sure.
What have you experienced in that process? I can sure say that we're glad to have you in the journey with us.
Well, that's a great question. And I want to just reinforce why I'm here in the first place is because you folks represent really a set of ideals and focus and capabilities that I've lived by for many, many years. But what was missing, or what has been missing in many ways because of my corporate focus, has really been the ability to introduce God or even Jesus Christ into the conversation. And you folks are not reluctant to do that. Here again, you don't really represent yourself necessarily as a faith-based organization per se, but you don't stay away from it because that's what attracted me. I wanted to, God keeps nudging me. Well, if I've already worked for 50 years, you have some pretty good idea how old I am. So, but God keeps nudging me and saying, I'm not done with you. And so what I really wanted to help people understand is that, number one, you really cannot be a powerful leader if you don't have a spiritual side to yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going to dictate what that spiritual side is, but I am going to tell you that one of the things you have to deal with when you're a leader is you have to deal with the truth. And if you don't know where to find the truth, you're going to have a hard time understanding how to interpret it so you can lead others to the truth. And frankly, I know that God built all of us. God designed and built all of us. Even if we're not a believer, even if we're an atheist for that matter, God still built us, which tells me, frankly, in simple terms, that there is a need to connect with God in everybody, because frankly, He built that software in us. That's how we're wired. Some of us get there sooner than others, But essentially, that capability is in there. So what I try to tell anybody I deal with is that my strength and my power and my success has come from not leaning on myself, but leaning on the Holy Spirit and leaning on the blessings I have from a spiritual standpoint. We're doing, as you well know, I'm busy with you folks on some cohorts that you're doing, and I'm working with some of your folks. And I like to just to maintain that simple reality that go to your spiritual self to find your power, because that's really where it is, because it's not greed and it's not pride. It's pure blessing, servant leadership power. Mm-hmm. And that's how I would define it, or that's how I would help explain it.
Yeah, you're right. Tara and I, in our team, which you're a part of here, has with the benefit of high trust relationships.
Yes.
I mean, over a couple decades of working with leaders, leaders in companies of all sizes. Some are spiritually based, and we work with churches, and we work with nonprofits that are Christian focused, if you will. But we have a lot of clients in the business world that are leading companies that aren't.
Absolutely.
And they may be a believer in Jesus themselves, but are trying to lead as a servant leader in right where where God has them.
Yep.
And wherever that takes place, what a privilege it is when our clients say, I would like to integrate this, this component. I mean, it's my source, my center as well. And that Living Wholehearted does that, it feels like a home. That happened recently for me with an individual that works for a global company here, a young executive, and he left the executive coaching that the company was providing for him because they didn't have this faith component to come into, as he had heard, word of mouth from others about Living Wholehearted. And it's just been a wonderful journey to be able to integrate that. Isn't it fun to be able to just open those doors? That's some of our favorite clientele, when those doors can be opened, because there are no barriers to make the connections that people are longing to make that you're describing.
Yes.
So I love that.
Well, one of the things that I tell people, and I'm happy to tell people, is I've been blessed in that I've spent a whole lot of time in my career with very senior level executives, presidents, CEOs, chairman of the boards of major corporations, and mostly in the high-tech sector. And I'm happy to tell you that in some of the very intimate conversations I've had with some of these people, their faith surfaces, and they'll be the first to tell you that they make decisions through the lens of the Bible, or they make decisions frankly, from a biblical point of view. So I think a lot of people would be surprised just how much influence these fundamental principles have, because frankly, in many cases, they're all biblical principles. They've just, that's why they're continue to be so relevant and continue to be so good.
Yeah,
okay?
The truth never changes.
The truth
right?
never changes.
Fundamentals.
The fundamentals never change. Yeah.
And I try to tell people, I'm kind of harkening back a little bit to what I said a few minutes ago, but really, if I was talking to young people, I try to tell them, make sure they love themselves and know themselves first. Whether they go and have some sort of an inventory done on who they are and what they are, like how we use the CVI and some of these other instruments, that one in itself is just beautiful, because it just tells people what their wiring is with no judgment. But you really can't move forward until you really know who you are.
Yeah, we actually put that in integrity. Like part of having integrity is aligning with who you really are. And if you don't know who you are, then you're going to be living in having a gap.
That's right.
Trying to be who you think you're supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the expectations of your followers, as well as for the counselor and me, your family of origin, who your parents think you were supposed to be. Exactly. And so this idea that you would know yourself, your communication styles, your conflict strategies, all that we do using the Core Values Index. And there's a lot of different ways to get there. It's just our favorite tool that we use.
No, I'm right there with you. But so much of corporate America, and I'm using that as a reference point because that's kind of where I spent my life, is so much of corporate America is about looking good.
Yeah.
And about trying to do things that people think are the right things to do. And that has a tendency over time to really compromise you in terms of what your values really are. So if you don't have a good understanding of what those are, it's pretty hard to navigate those temptations to be something different than who you are.
Joe, what I'm hearing you say, I think we'd be hearing both of this in the same ways, is that to a young leader, to an emerging leader
Yes.
who is even before they've been given power and authority to affect change in their organization, whatever that might be, corporate America or otherwise, take the time and be intentional to do what we say, which is, work to get your baggage down to carry on size.
Yes.
That you might be more available to serve others, actually, rather than using others to get your needs met in unhealthy ways. It's like, isn't that what happens? I mean,
Sure.
in the effort to try to look good and perform, there's nothing wrong with performance.
Oh, no,
unless you're using it to hide from something.
Sure. Well, the fundamental principle of leadership is influence. Okay. I mean, a lot of people have positions because they've been given a position in a company, but positional leadership isn't leadership. That's just a job description. And people respond to you because they have to. No, if you really want to lead, you lead through influence. And the only way you get influence is through trust. And the only way you get trust is through vulnerability. So it's a package. We call it character. It includes integrity. It includes all those things, but that's really what it boils down to. And if you don't know who you are to start with, you certainly don't have any idea what you need to build your character map and to do what you need to do. So, because those are the things you have to rely on. And believe me, we all know leaders that are just leaders because they have a title. We also know leaders who have influence. And everybody's got somebody in their world that way. And you'll recognize that influence really comes from trust. So,
well, I'm going to put a little plug in here for those who are listening who are going, you know what, I want to grow there. I mean, that's honestly what humility is just a willingness to live in reality and a willingness to continue to grow and to learn from those. And so the submissive process of being under an executive coach like Joe, Jeff, is learning and growing and having someone help mirror back with grace. We're all in process. But you guys have a men's cohort, and that is by invitation. They can email you guys, or you do individual coaching and organizational development. So Joe, if there's somebody that would love to reach out to you and to learn more, how can they get a hold of you?
I would suggest that they rely on my association with Living Wholehearted. And if they just go to joe@livingwholehearted.com, they can find me. That's a good email address. The best way to find me, obviously, I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. And I limit my social media to just Facebook and LinkedIn. But they can find me in that context. And frankly, if it's urgent, they can call me at 206-817-4930. I give a few free samples, but after that, we try to get them into a structured engagement so that we can help them along the path of development. So
I love it. A leader who gives their phone number out.
Oh, yeah.
Vulnerability.
I love it.
There you go. Hey, yeah, somebody may need something quick. And to the extent that I can be the answer, man, I'm happy to do it. So.
Joe, we're really grateful to have you on the team. It's a privilege to co-labor together, and we do this work from our own convictions and our place of heart, but to link arms together is a great privilege. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today, for your wisdom, for the time that you've given to us, and we're just excited about the opportunities that lie before us. And if you're listening out there today and are encouraged, reach out to Joe. He's given you everything you need to reach out. And Living Wholehearted, we are here to help you in your leadership journey. Whether you're emerging as a leader or you're a seasoned leader, we've got the bases covered, and we want to help you live with greater integrity. When we do, as a leader, everyone in your wake serves the benefit, and it's really worth that commitment and that time to take the time to grow in your leadership. This is a journey. It's a lifestyle. It's not an event. So thanks for tuning in today. Well, did you know that we're not just podcasters? One of the best ways to connect with Tara and I and our whole team at Living Wholehearted is our website, livingwholehearted.com. There you're going to find the books that we've written, our e-courses, executive coaching, organizational development, and professional counseling services. And then one of our favorite things that we're up to these days, our Wholehearted Leadership Cohorts, where we take groups of leaders for 1 to 2 year journeys together. It's amazing. While you're there, for fresh content, make sure that you sign up for our e-newsletter. That's where we're putting out stuff every month that you want to keep close with. So visit livingwholehearted.com.
You can also join us on socials at living_wholehearted on Instagram, and we are Living Wholehearted on Facebook. You can also follow me at Tara Matson on Instagram. We love to engage with you personally there, so make sure you reach out. Leave us a review if you're enjoying this podcast.
Hey, thank you for caring about being the kind of person and leader that lives with integrity.